I was 14 at the time of this incident. I was home with my brother, grandma, and baby cousin. My brother had invited some girl over. Please remember that part because it is key to the story. My brother then introduced us to the girl. She looked normal but seemed a bit nervous. My grandma asked her some questions and told her if her and my brother needed anything to let her know. Anyways, my grandma told me to stay upstairs and allow my brother and the girl privacy downstairs. Of course, me being the nosy little sister, I wanted to know everything, especially this new girl my brother brought home. I snuck down the hall quietly and looked over the banister. I saw the girl looking outside in the backyard and asking my brother a question like, "Who all lives here? Is this your guys' house? It's so nice." Hearing the conversation, I decided to listen to my grandma and go back inside my room. I began to listen to music, felt the urge to look outside my window. I then saw a 2000 Chevrolet Impala parked outside our driveway. The door was wide open, and it appeared to be a man leaving our home with all of our tech items from our house packed neatly inside the car. The feeling of dread came over me. I said, "Hey, what's going on?" Then the sound of loud talking was heard downstairs, and my brother said, "Please, you don't have to do this. Just let us leave if you know what's best," the girl responded. I hurried and ran to my grandmother's quietly as I let her know what was going on downstairs. She didn't understand the severity of what I was telling her and began to laugh, which made me upset because our life could be in danger. I heard tires screech and saw the Impala speed down the street. I called out to my brother, and he said, "Huh?" in a distraught voice. "What's going on? Who was the man outside?" I asked. He didn't reply. I walked downstairs and saw my brother shaking his head in disbelief, looking at where our TV set used to be. The police came shortly due to my grandmother calling them. We were later informed that my brother and the girl met for the first time that day off of a dating app, and of course they met at our house. The girl of course set up the entire robbery. She was just the decoy until her boyfriend came to rob us. But this part I'm about to say makes my blood run cold. The guy who robbed us held my brother at knife point and said if he didn't comply he would stab all of us upstairs as a punishment for him getting in the way. The cops asked my brother to give a full description, but he didn't. Later on the same day, we then heard a truck park on the side of the house. Whoever was in it yelled and threw a glass bottle down and drove off. I'm not sure if it was the same man who robbed us, but it terrified me nevertheless. I'm grateful nothing happened to my brother though, or my family. It goes to show you that you really can't trust anyone. Talking with a fellow student reminded me of this. It's an encounter from a few years back, I think autumn of 2017. I try to remember what was said, but it might be a bit off. It was a dark part of the year, only few street lights, but the wet asphalt seemed to absorb all the light and make the scenery seem even darker. So I had moved into my late mom's house a few years before. It was a nice neighborhood, but close to one particularly bad area, and it's one even worse apartment building that was known as Murder Alley. It was a dangerous neighborhood, with a few mailmen killed, doors broken with axes, passers-by thrown at with old TVs, stones, and more. Drug users and shady people lived there. I was suspicious toward strangers on the streets and avoided telling where I lived. So one evening I left to a store a short walk away. Met a stranger just after leaving my yard. He had dirty clothes, greasy hair, and kind of seemed off right away. The man came towards me and started to talk. S will stand for stranger, and I will use the letter M when I refer to what I'm saying. S. Where do you live? He asked in an annoyed tone. I have no idea who he was looking for. M. I don't know. S. Why? He sounded even more annoyed. M. I don't live here, I said as I tried to remain calm. I hurried past him and didn't look back. I was too scared to possibly find him staring at me or even following me. He was a large man, heavy built and perhaps a bit over 6 feet, and I was a 5'1" tiny woman. Just went to the store and did my shopping. Afterwards, I started walking home when I saw the guy standing right in the shadows behind the shop's corner. I kept walking, and when turning in my driveway, I glanced behind and saw him following me. I walked through my dark yard, inside my house, and didn't put the lights on, but peeked through the window facing the street. The guy was standing there next to my mailbox, staring into my window. I took a few steps back, freaking out, and just waited in the dark. I messaged my friend group what was happening, so they could check on me if something would happen. I said I had an axe next to my door if the guy would try to come inside. One of my friends, my now boyfriend, told me to call the police at once. I took a glance outside, and the strange guy turned away and left, so I didn't make the call. I never saw that man again, but I'm glad I didn't get to turn into an axe murderer in self-defense. The murder alley was torn down a couple years after, and the bad vibe disappeared with it. The area is now more peaceful than it ever has been since the apartment was built in 1960. In the late 90s, I was in elementary school, and one of the teachers at my school taught tennis. My parents were friends with this teacher and his wife, and my brother and I wanted to play tennis, so my mom signed us up for lessons on the weekends. The tennis courts were very close to the school, just down the road, and we lived close to the school in the other direction. Mom usually walked my brother and me to school while carrying my baby sister, but the courts were too far in addition to our tennis gear. On this day, our teacher greeted us at our car as he had arrived shortly before us and had just unloaded his own gear. My mom got my sister out of the car, took my brother's hand, and asked me to get the rackets from the trunk. She and our teacher walked around the gates to get into the courts. Shortly before this, a rumor had spread at my friend's baseball game that a girl had been kidnapped at a nearby restaurant. This had me on high alert when a green minivan pulled up behind me as I was getting our rackets. I was 6, but I was the eldest and enjoyed helping Mom. Dad worked a lot on the road, so I was proud of being able to make cereal and toast, bring in groceries, and pretty much do whatever Mom asked me to do. I was also the kid that went home and told Mom everything I learned that day in school. My elementary school always did stranger danger segments in PE class. One of the video series was a red alien dude. I don't remember a whole lot outside of that, but I do remember a tape where a couple asked him for help finding their dog, and they took him in their van. So imagine my horror when I'm alone behind Mom's car. Mom and teacher have walked too far away to help me, and this man and woman in a green minivan ask if I've seen a puppy. They said the puppy ran out of their front door, and they've been looking. Could I come with them and help? I had the rackets in my hands, and I just shook my head, dropped them, and ran. My mom, seeing my face, asked what was wrong, and as I told her what happened, the van was already down the opposite end of the street and turning. I wish that had been my whole experience, but not even a year later. My mom had taken the 3 of us and my best friends to our favorite snowball stand. My mom was friends with the lady that owned it, and she spent a lot of time talking with her first. As she did, I was just staring out at the street. To be honest, I just wanted my chocolate snowball and didn't care for much else at the time. A man stopped his van in the street, caught my eye, and motioned with one hand for me to come over. Of course, after my last encounter, I definitely do not trust strangers. I hid behind my mom's legs, literally got down on the ground and hid, while he continued beckoning for me, until my mom and the snowball lady turned to look at him. I don't recall seeing a car speed off so fast until I started driving and got on the interstate for the first time. When I started college in 2011, I formed a solid friendship group, threw myself into the social life. One guy in my block who always showed up to parties but never spoke much to anyone was a classic neckbeard, overweight anime fan, lacking in social skills combined with awkward attempts to be overconfident. He also never washed, wore stained gray clothes that never changed, had long, lank, greasy hair, was surrounded by a cloud of BO. It would enter the room before he did. Sorry if this description sounds unnecessarily mean. I wouldn't normally judge people for these things in themselves, but combined with his behavior, it is frankly warranted. With regret and hindsight, I make the mistake of chatting with him at one of these parties with the aim of being friendly and helping get more integrated into the group. From that moment, a switch flipped in him, and he began obsessively stalking me, which could go on for the rest of freshman year. He would try to isolate me at social events, talking to me for hours and taking none of my cues that I wanted to bring it to a close. If I tried to lose him, he would find me. If I spent time with my actual friends, he would follow and force his way into the conversation, following me around like a wasp on a mission. If he saw me in public, he would give me this 1,000-yard stare, unblinking stare, even from a couple 100 meters away, and would then come over. It got to the point that I felt I had some kind of tracker on me, because wherever I was, he would appear. Even when leaving the campus library at 3 a.m., more than once at night, I looked through the peephole in my door to the hall outside to see him stood there, staring intensely at my door. Obviously, this was seriously creepy behavior. I felt hunted. I was frightened and on alert at all time. He started to avoid going out of my room. I also started going to my parents a lot just so I could get out of town. My friends were worried about me, and a couple of them confronted him about his behavior and asked him to leave me alone. This did not go down well. His obsession turned to rage. Thankfully, he kept more of a distance, but he would still hang out in the places he knew I would be, staring at me with now intense hatred. He started telling everyone that I was his girlfriend and had dumped him in a horribly cruel way. Made me question myself that a few people actually believed him. This continued into our sophomore year, when he got too close to one of my housemates, started turning up unannounced at our place. This friend believed the stories he was telling and thought that I was being unfair in asking him not to bring this guy around. He ended up stealing my mail, including a new bank card. I had no evidence that it was him, but I had so much stuff go missing, and I knew he was doing this. I also once found him in my bedroom. That was the last straw, and my roommate finally accepted that this man was creepy and a liar. When I moved away, the in-person stuff stopped, but he started cyber stalking me, trying daily to hack any of my accounts that he could find. This continued, though to a lesser extent, for a period of 3 years, but since then everything seemed to die down, and I thought it was over. I recently found his blog, where he writes fantasy stories about our relationship and calls me the love of his life, more than 10 years later. Montana school teacher Rita Mays called her husband first. She had been hit on the head and kidnapped from a highway rest stop. She was currently in the trunk of a moving car. She had no idea where she was going or who had taken her. For several excruciating hours, Rita remained in contact with her husband and a Helena police officer as her phone signal became more and more unreliable. Police were able to determine the direction the car was headed in, eventually tracing it to Spokane, Washington, after contact had been lost. Local authorities found the car shortly after midnight in a parking lot. Rita's body was in the trunk. The coroner established she had been killed after arriving in Spokane. For 13-year-old Elena, the family trip in the summer of 2014 was to be a getaway from all the problems in her family. Her parents were going through a divorce, and a looming court-ordered visitation with her father was a source of stress, but it would end with the most horrifying moment of her life, with her mother, who had just drowned her 2-year-old baby sister, slashing Alana's wrists and throat while screaming at her to die faster. With her teenage daughter bleeding out, Jessica Smith simply left their hotel room, telling Elena to lock the door behind her, which she did. She was discovered by hotel staff and amazingly survived. The mother was found hours later. She was briefly committed, found competent to stand trial, and eventually accepted a plea agreement, which will see her behind bars for a minimum of 30 years. Thank you all for watching and listening. Please be sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe now for future content. Email your scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. The link to the email will be in the description box below as well. Until we meet again, stay sinful.